My name is Mary Ellen, and for most of my life, I believed I knew what faith was: a routine of hymns, prayers, and quiet service as a choir director in a small town. I clung to perfection, to control, trying to create beauty while my own heart quietly fractured under the weight of regret and broken relationships. But all of that changed the night I died. In those fleeting moments, I was swept into a realm beyond imagination, where every choice I'd made resounded like music in heaven's eternal symphony. What I saw, what I heard, and what I was shown by God shattered everything I thought I understood about life, forgiveness, and faith, and gave me the chance to begin again. The rain was already pounding the roof of the church by the time I stepped into the sanctuary, my arms full of sheet music. The storm had rolled in faster than the forecast predicted, a fitting backdrop to the chaos brewing inside. The choir was restless, bickering over song choices and seating arrangements, the tension crackling louder than the thunder outside. I tried to ignore the pang in my chest, not just the literal ache that had been growing for weeks, but the deeper pain of knowing how far we'd drifted from the unity we once had. "Mary, we need to talk," called Deborah, one of the altos, her voice sharp as she cornered me near the organ. "I've had enough of these old arrangements. We're losing people because you refuse to change." Her words cut deeper than they should have. I knew the numbers were down. Half the pews were empty on Sundays, and the choir, once 20 strong, now barely filled a row. But the music we sang, those hymns steeped in history and reverence, was the one thing I refused to compromise on. Still, my voice faltered when I responded. "Deborah, this isn't about the music. It's about commitment. If people aren't showing up, it's because their hearts aren't in it. And maybe that's because your heart isn't in it anymore." She shot back, her eyes narrowing. "When's the last time you really listened to any of us?" I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but something in her words struck a nerve. When had I last listened to the choir, to my family, even to God? Before I could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over me. My hands fumbled, the sheet music slipping to the floor as I steadied myself against the piano. "Mary, are you okay?" someone asked, but their voice sounded distant, muffled, like I was hearing it through water. The room tilted, the stained glass windows blurring into streaks of color. My chest tightened, and the world went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the church anymore. At least, not in the way I had known it. The storm was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The light around me wasn't natural. It was soft and shimmering, like liquid gold suspended in the air. I stood on what felt like solid ground. But when I looked down, I saw only a vast, endless expanse of light and shadow, shifting like waves. I wasn't alone. Figures began to emerge from the brightness, their forms radiant and indistinct, as if made of pure energy. Their presence filled me with a mixture of awe and fear, a sense that I was standing in the presence of something far greater than myself. The air around them pulsed with a sound, a melody so complex and beautiful that it seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my soul. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, as if every note carried the weight of eternity. "Mary Ellen," a voice said, gentle yet powerful. I couldn't see who spoke. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Do you know where you are?" I, I don't understand," I stammered, my own voice trembling. "Am I dead?" In a sense, the voice replied, and there was something almost tender in the way it spoke. "But your journey is not finished. You have been brought here to see what lies beyond." As the words sank in, a sense of shame washed over me. I thought of all the things I hadn't done, the people I hadn't forgiven, the relationships I'd let fracture, especially with my daughter. A pang of regret struck me, sharper than the pain that had felled me in the sanctuary. The figures began to move closer, their forms shifting and shimmering like a mirage. "Your life has been a song," one of them said, their voice melodic and resonant. "Every choice, every word, every thought has contributed to the music of creation. Come, listen." Before I could ask what they meant, the light around us shifted, and suddenly I was standing in a scene from my past. I recognized it instantly, the church, but not as it was now. It was years ago, filled with people singing with joy and passion, the choir harmonizing perfectly. I was at the center of it all, conducting with energy I hadn't felt in a long time. The melody was alive, vibrant, and I could feel how every note resonated with love and faith. But then the scene changed. The music became fractured, discordant. I saw myself years later, standing in the same place but surrounded by fewer people. My movements were rigid, my face strained. The notes I heard were jagged, clashing painfully. I realized with a jolt that this was my doing, my stubbornness, my pride, my refusal to change. Every harsh word, every unkind thought was a note in this broken melody. I turned to the beings, tears streaming down my face. What have I done? I didn't mean for it to be this way. One of them stepped forward, their light softening. You have created both harmony and dissonance, Mary Ellen. This is the nature of free will. But the song is not yet finished. There is time to make it whole. The words filled me with both hope and dread. I wanted to believe I could fix the broken parts of my life, but I didn't know where to start. How? How do I fix this? The being gestured, and the light shifted again. This time, I saw a younger version of myself, sitting at the piano with a small boy from the choir. He was struggling with the melody, his tiny hands stumbling over the keys. I remembered the moment. It was one of the few times I had been truly patient, guiding him gently until he played it correctly. The joy on his face was radiant, and as I watched, I realized that the music he played was now echoing in the space around me, blending seamlessly with a celestial symphony. Even the smallest act of kindness can create beauty that endures, the voice said. But so too can unkindness leave its mark. The scene shifted again, this time to a fight I had with my daughter. The words I had spoken were sharp, meant to wound, and I saw the way they had hurt her, how they lingered in her heart. The dissonance from this moment was unbearable, the sound grating and oppressive. I fell to my knees, sobbing. I didn't know. I didn't realize. The beings didn't speak, but their presence was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The light around me began to dim, and I felt myself being pulled back, the music fading. But before it disappeared entirely, I heard the voice again, soft but resolute. Your psalm is still being written. Go back and finish it. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, the fluorescent lights of the hospital harsh and cold. My chest ached, my body felt heavy, but my heart carried something it hadn't before, a glimmer of hope and the weight of the mission I had been given. The hospital room was silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor beside me. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. My chest felt heavy, both from the physical pain and the weight of what I'd seen, what I'd heard. The memory of that otherworldly music lingered, haunting me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it all again. The radiant beings, the shifting light, the broken symphony of my life. I'd been given a glimpse into something eternal, something I couldn't fully comprehend, but now I was back here, with no idea how to make sense of it. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in, her expression warm but professional. You've been through quite an ordeal, she said softly, checking my four. You're lucky to be alive. Alive. The word felt heavier than it should. I nodded weakly, not trusting my voice to say more. My mind wasn't in this room. It was still caught in that luminous realm, replaying everything I'd been shown. The smallest acts of kindness creating harmonies in heaven, the moments of failure turning into discord. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been given a chance to fix it, but where would I even start? Later that day, my daughter, Sarah, arrived. Her presence was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she belonged here. I couldn't blame her. We hadn't spoken in months, our relationship fractured by years of unspoken resentment and harsh words. She stood in the doorway, clutching her phone like a shield, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Hi, Mom, she said finally, her voice quiet. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to smile. Hi, sweetheart. She walked in slowly, sitting on the edge of the chair by my bed. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. I wanted to reach out, to tell her everything I'd seen, but where would I even begin? How do you explain to someone that you've seen heaven, that your life is a song and every choice is a note in its melody? Sarah, I said, my voice trembling. I, I'm so glad you're here. Her eyes flicked to mine, wary but curious. When I got the call, I didn't know if I should come. We haven't exactly been close. The words stung, but they were true. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I know, and I'm sorry for everything, for all the times I hurt you, or didn't listen, or put my own pride before our relationship. She blinked, clearly startled by the sudden apology. Mom, where is this coming from? How could I explain it without sounding like I'd lost my mind? I hesitated, the words tumbling around in my head, unsure how to take shape. I had an experience, I said finally, when my heart stopped. I saw things that changed me. Her brow furrowed, and I could see the skepticism in her eyes. You mean like a dream? No, I said firmly. Not a dream. It was real. I don't know how to explain it, but I saw my life, the choices I've made, the good and the bad, and I realized how much I've failed you. I've been holding on to so much anger, so much pride, and it's hurt both of us. She didn't respond right away, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too hard, but then she sighed, leaning back in the chair. You really believe that, don't you? I do, I said, my voice soft but certain. And I want to make things right. I don't want to waste any more time being angry or distant. You're my daughter, Sarah, and I love you. Her eyes glistened, and she looked away quickly, pretending to focus on the monitor beside my bed. I don't know what to say, she admitted. It's been so long. I'm not sure we even know how to fix this. We start by trying, I said simply, one note at a time. She laughed softly at that, though it was tinged with sadness. You and your music metaphors. I smiled, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And beginnings were all I could ask for right now. After she left, I found myself alone with my thoughts again. The hospital room felt stifling, too small to contain the enormity of what I'd experienced. I closed my eyes, and the music returned, filling the darkness behind my eyelids. The harmony of my kindness to that little boy at the piano, the dissonance of my argument with Sarah, it was all there, woven into a tapestry far greater than I could understand. The beings had said my song wasn't finished, but what did that mean? How could I rewrite the broken notes of my life? Over the next few days, I began to notice things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the nurses spoke to each other, the tone of their voices, it was music in its own way. Some conversations were light and harmonious, others sharp and discordant. Even the simplest interactions seemed to carry a weight I hadn't noticed before. I realized how easy it was to create beauty or pain with just a few words. One afternoon, I asked one of the nurses for a notepad. I want to write something down, I told her. She handed me a small spiral-bound notebook, and I stared at the blank page for a long time before finally putting pen to paper. I began to list the people I'd hurt, the relationships I'd neglected, the moments I'd chosen pride or anger over love. It was a long list, and by the time I finished, my hand was shaking. But alongside it, I started another list, the small acts of kindness I could still choose, the ways I could make amends. Writing it down felt like a prayer, a promise to myself and to God that I wouldn't waste the second chance I'd been given. When I was discharged from the hospital, Sarah was there to take me home. The drive was quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence we'd shared before. This time, it felt like the beginning of something fragile but hopeful. As we pulled into my driveway, she turned to me, her expression uncertain. "Do you want me to stay for a while?" she asked. I smiled, my heart swelling with gratitude. I'd like that. As we stepped inside, I felt the weight of the mission ahead of me. I didn't know how to fix everything, but I knew I had to try. The echoes of the celestial music were still with me, a constant reminder of the beauty and dissonance I'd created. My song wasn't finished, but I was determined to make it whole. The days after returning home were strange, like stepping into a life that didn't quite fit anymore. Everything looked the same: my house, my routines, even my reflection in the mirror, but I felt like a stranger inside it all. The memory of that otherworldly realm lingered, tugging at the edges of my thoughts no matter how hard I tried to focus on the present. I kept hearing the music, the echoes of my choices, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched, not in a sinister way, but as if the beings I met were still waiting to see what I'd do next. Sarah stayed with me for a few days, helping me adjust after the hospital. It was awkward at first, navigating the distance we built between us over the years, but there were moments when the old warmth between us flickered back to life. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping tea, she brought up something I hadn't dared to mention. "So," she began, staring out at the overgrown garden I hadn't tended in months, "what exactly did you see when you died?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain it in a way that wouldn't sound crazy. "It's hard to put into words," I said finally. "It wasn't just seeing, it was experiencing, like stepping into the middle of a song and realizing you're part of it." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but she didn't interrupt. Encouraged, I continued. "I saw my life as a kind of music. Every choice I've made, every word I've spoken, created a note in this symphony. The good moments, the times I acted with love or kindness, were beautiful, harmonious. But the bad ones, the times I let anger or pride get the better of me, they were jarring, dissonant." Her expression softened, her curiosity replacing the skepticism I'd expected. "That's kind of beautiful," she admitted, "but also terrifying." "It was both," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The hardest part was seeing how much of the discord I caused, especially with you." She didn't say anything for a moment, but I saw her swallow hard, her fingers tightening around her mug. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I guess we both caused some of that." Her words were like a balm to a wound I hadn't even realized I was still nursing. I reached over and squeezed her hand, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were truly connected. After Sarah left, I threw myself into making changes. The list I'd started in the hospital became my guide, each item a small step toward repairing the broken parts of my life. The first thing I tackled was the choir. Returning to the church felt daunting, especially after my collapse, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The storm that night had done more than shake the building. It had shaken the trust and unity of the people inside it. If I wanted to rebuild the harmony I'd lost, I had to start there. At the next rehearsal, I stood before the choir with my list tucked in my pocket like a secret weapon. The familiar faces were there, Deborah among them, her arms crossed and her expression skeptical, but I also noticed a few new ones. Word of my near death experience must have spread, though no one dared ask me about it directly. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Before we start, I want to apologize. I've been holding on to my own ideas about what this choir should be, and in doing so, I've ignored what all of you need. That wasn't right, and I'm sorry." The room was silent for a beat, the weight of my words sinking in. Then Deborah, to my surprise, uncrossed her arms and nodded. "Thank you for saying that, Mary," she said. "I think we all want the same thing, to make something beautiful. Maybe we just have different ideas of how to get there." I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through me. "Then let's figure it out together." The rehearsal that followed wasn't perfect, but it was better. For the first time in years, I felt like we were working as a team, building something greater than ourselves. The music we created wasn't just notes on a page. It was a reflection of our shared effort, our collective hope. As I conducted, I caught glimpses of the celestial symphony in my mind, and for a moment, I felt like I was part of it again. But not every relationship was so easy to mend. One name on my list loomed larger than the rest: my father. He had passed away years ago, but the bitterness I felt toward him had never fully healed. I knew I couldn't change the past, but the beings had shown me how that unresolved pain was still affecting my life, creating a discord that rippled outward in ways I hadn't realized. Forgiving him felt impossible, but I knew I had to try. One night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the house dark except for the glow of a single lamp. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, imagining my father sitting across from me. His face came to me easily, sharp and stern, the way I always remembered him. But as I sat there, letting the memory take shape, I realized something. I never truly tried to see him as anything other than the source of my pain. I forgive you, I said aloud, my voice barely more than a whisper. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go. I need to stop letting this define me. The words felt strange, almost foreign, but as I said them, a weight I hadn't known I was carrying lifted. It wasn't a perfect release. There was still hurt, still anger, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, I began to notice changes, not just in myself, but in the people around me. Sarah called more often, our conversations easier and warmer. The choir grew, new voices joining our ranks as word of our renewed spirit spread through the town. Even the church itself seemed brighter, as if the light streaming through the stained glass windows carried a little more warmth than before. But the echoes of the celestial music never left me. They were a constant reminder of the work still ahead, the notes I had yet to write. My psalm wasn't finished, and though I didn't know what lay ahead, I was determined to make the melody whole. Weeks turned into months, and life began to find a rhythm again, though nothing about it felt quite the same. The world seemed sharper now, its colors more vivid, its moments more fragile. Every conversation, every gesture carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I knew, deep down, that the celestial symphony was still playing somewhere beyond my sight, and every day I was writing new notes into it. But the question that lingered in my mind was whether I was creating harmony or more discord. The choir had grown, both in numbers and in spirit. Rehearsals were no longer battles over tradition versus change, but collaborations, each member contributing ideas and energy. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not of my control, but of our collective effort. Yet, even as the music we made became more beautiful, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being tested, that this was only the beginning of the transformation I needed to complete. One evening after rehearsal, I stayed behind in the sanctuary, the soft glow of the candlelight casting long shadows across the pews. The room was empty except for me, the faint hum of the organ still hanging in the air. I sat at the piano, running my fingers over the keys without pressing them, the memory of that otherworldly melody filling my mind. I had heard the music of heaven, and no matter how much we tried, nothing on earth could match it. Yet I felt a pull, a deep desire to try. Why is it never enough? I whispered into the silence, my voice breaking. Why can't I just feel whole? The question hung in the air, unanswered, and for a moment, I felt utterly alone. But then, like a breeze stirring the stillness, a memory surfaced, the glimpse I'd been given of heaven's choir. I had felt whole there, standing among those radiant beings, their voices blending into a harmony so profound it defied comprehension. A part of me longed to return, to stay in that perfect place forever. Yet I was here, still tethered to this flawed and fragile world. The next day, I visited the cemetery where my father was buried. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light over the rows of headstones. I hadn't been here in years, not since the funeral, when my anger at him still burned too brightly to allow for mourning. But now, standing before his grave, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, sorrow, regret, and something I couldn't quite name. I came to talk, I said aloud, my voice unsteady. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need to say this anyway. I knelt beside the headstone, running my fingers over the engraved letters of his name. I've been angry at you for so long. Angry for the way you pushed me, for the way you made me feel like nothing I did was good enough. I thought if I held on to that anger, it would protect me somehow. But it didn't. It just made everything worse. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't stop. I'm not saying what you did was okay, but I can't carry this anymore. I forgive you, Dad. Not because you earned it, but because I need to let go. I need to be free. The words felt like a release, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. For the first time, I felt a flicker of peace, not a full resolution, but the beginning of one. As I stood to leave, the wind picked up, rustling the trees around me, and for a moment, I thought I heard faint music carried on the breeze. It wasn't the symphony I'd heard in heaven, but it was something, a gentle reminder that I was on the right path. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Sarah and I spent more time together, slowly rebuilding the trust we'd lost. The choir began preparing for the Easter service, our biggest performance of the year, and for once, I felt like we were truly united in purpose. Yet, even amidst these small victories, I couldn't shake the sense that something larger was looming, something I couldn't quite name. That feeling came to a head one evening when I was alone in my living room, sorting through old photographs. I came across a picture of a boy, Matthew, who had been in the children's choir years ago. His face was bright with joy, his eyes wide with excitement as he sat at the piano during one of our lessons. I remembered how much potential he had, how eager he was to learn. But then, like a dark cloud passing over the sun, another memory surfaced. The last time I'd seen him, he had made a mistake during rehearsal, and in my frustration, I'd snapped at him, my words harsher than I'd intended. His face had fallen, the light in his eyes dimming, and though I'd apologized later, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd failed him. A few weeks later, he was killed in a car accident. I'd told myself it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have known, but the guilt lingered, a sour note in the melody of my life. Now, holding the photograph, the weight of that moment pressed down on me again. Had my harsh words added to the discord of his final days? Had I taken something from him that I couldn't give back? The thought was almost too much to bear. I closed my eyes, clutching the picture to my chest. God, I whispered, my voice trembling. If you're still with me, show me what to do. Show me how to make this right. The room was silent, but in the stillness, I felt a warmth, a presence that was both comforting and convicting. The memory of Matthew's joy came back to me, brighter this time, and I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could honor him by making sure I never let my frustration dim someone else's light again. As I sat there, the faint echoes of the celestial symphony began to stir in my mind. It was as if the music was calling me forward, urging me to keep going, to keep creating beauty in the midst of brokenness. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Easter morning arrived with a crispness in the air that carried a sense of renewal. The church was buzzing with life, the sanctuary filled with flowers and sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. It should have been a perfect day, the culmination of all our hard work in the choir, but my chest felt heavy with a weight I couldn't shake. No matter how many relationships I mended or kind words I offered, there were still pieces of my past that felt jagged, incomplete. The rehearsal had gone smoothly, and the choir sounded better than they had in years. Yet as we filed into the side room to prepare for the service, I found myself retreating to a quiet corner, the familiar faces and voices around me fading into the background. The photograph of Matthew had stayed with me since I'd found it, tucked into my bag as a reminder of the lesson I'd learned, but also of the unresolved pain that lingered. Mary, are you all right? Deborah's voice startled me, pulling me back into the moment. She stood a few feet away, her expression softer than usual, tinged with concern. I'm fine, I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me. She didn't move, her gaze steady. You've been different lately. I think we've all noticed it, how you've changed. But I also think there's something you're not saying. I hesitated, my instinct to brush her off battling with the pull of honesty. Finally, I sighed, motioning for her to sit beside me. There's something I've been carrying, I admitted. Something I can't seem to let go of. She listened quietly as I told her about Matthew, the joy he'd brought to the choir, and the sharp words I'd spoken to him in frustration. As I spoke, the memories came rushing back, vivid and painful, as if they had happened yesterday. When he died, I said, my voice breaking, I told myself it wasn't my fault. And maybe it wasn't, not in the way I thought. But I've realized that words carry weight, sometimes more than we know. I can't stop thinking about the light in his eyes that day, how I dimmed it, even if only for a moment. Deborah placed a hand on my arm, her touch grounding me. Mary, we've all made mistakes. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that guilt doesn't honor anyone's memory. What does is how we move forward, what we do with the lessons we've learned. Her words struck a chord, resonating with the lessons I'd been shown in the celestial realm. The symphony of life wasn't about perfection, it was about redemption, about weaving the broken notes into something whole. I nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm of emotion. Thank you, I said quietly. I think I needed to hear that. The service began shortly after, the sanctuary filling with the congregation's murmurs and the faint rustle of hymnals. As the choir took their places, I felt a nervous energy buzzing through me, the weight of the morning mingling with the anticipation of what was to come. The opening hymn began, the familiar melody rising and filling the space with warmth. Yet as I conducted, my thoughts kept drifting, the music around me interweaving with the echoes of the celestial symphony I'd heard. Then came the final piece, the one we'd worked hardest to perfect, a soaring arrangement that brought together voices and instruments in a crescendo of praise. As the choir sang, something shifted. The music seemed to take on a life of its own, each note resonating not just in the sanctuary, but in my very soul. I closed my eyes for a moment, and there it was, the faint but unmistakable presence of the divine, the same warmth I'd felt in that otherworldly place. When the song ended, the congregation erupted into applause, their joy palpable. Yet as I turned to face them, my eyes fell on a figure in the back of the church, a boy, sitting quietly with a serene expression. My breath caught, my heart racing as I blinked, certain I was imagining things. But when I looked again, the seat was empty. After the service, I found myself standing in the sanctuary long after everyone else had gone, the stillness wrapping around me like a cloak. My mind kept returning to that fleeting image, the boy who looked so much like Matthew. Was it a trick of the light, a projection of my own longing? Or was it something more? God, I whispered, my voice trembling. If that was a sign, if he's at peace, thank you. But if not, show me what to do. Show me how to honor him. The answer didn't come in words, but in a feeling, a gentle nudge, a reminder of the music I'd been tasked to create. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it, about using the pain and guilt to fuel something beautiful. The next day, I sat down at the piano in my living room, Matthew's photograph propped on the stand. The sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a soft glow as my fingers hovered over the keys. I closed my eyes, letting the echoes of the celestial melody guide me, and began to play. The notes were tentative at first, fragile and uncertain, but as I let go of my fear, they grew stronger, weaving together into a song that felt both new and ancient, a prayer and a promise. As the final notes faded, I felt a peace settle over me, deeper and more profound than anything I'd experienced since my near death experience. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was enough. For the first time, I understood what the beings had meant when they said my song wasn't finished. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey, about embracing the imperfections and finding grace in the process. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain. I would keep playing, keep singing, keep creating. My life was still a symphony in progress, and I was determined to make it a masterpiece. The weeks following the Easter service felt like a quiet kind of awakening. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years was finally lifting, replaced by something I could only describe as clarity. It wasn't that my life had suddenly become easy or that all my relationships were magically repaired. But there was a new rhythm to things, one I hadn't noticed before, a rhythm of grace, of intention, of small but meaningful choices that seemed to ripple outward in ways I couldn't always see. Sarah and I had settled into a new normal. She called more often, not out of obligation, but because she seemed to genuinely want to talk. Our conversations were still tentative at times, but there was a warmth now, a sense that we were both trying. One evening, she invited me to dinner at her place, something she hadn't done in years. Sitting at her table, sharing a meal and laughing over stories from her childhood, I felt a pang of bittersweet regret for all the moments we'd missed. But I also felt hope, a belief that we were building something new, one small step at a time. The choir, too, had changed. The energy in our rehearsals was different now, lighter, more collaborative. People who had once felt sidelined or ignored were stepping forward with ideas, and the music we created together reflected that unity. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. For the first time, I understood that the beauty of music wasn't in its flawlessness, but in the way it brought people together, in a shared act of creation. Still, the memory of my near death experience lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I found myself returning to it often, replaying the scenes I'd been shown, the music I'd heard, the truths I'd been forced to confront. The celestial symphony was still with me, its echoes weaving into my daily life in ways I couldn't always explain. It was both a comfort and a challenge, reminder that my work wasn't done. One afternoon, I decided to visit the church alone. The sanctuary was quiet, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the pews. I sat at the piano, my fingers hovering over the keys as I let the silence envelop me. For a moment, I closed my eyes, and the memory of that heavenly music filled my mind again, its beauty both overwhelming and inspiring. I began to play, letting the melody guide me. It wasn't a song I'd written or even one I consciously knew. It felt more like something flowing through me, something I was meant to bring into the world. As the notes filled the sanctuary, I felt a warmth settle over me, a sense of connection to something far greater than myself. The music wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone, to the divine, to the eternal. When I finished, I opened my eyes to find the pastor standing at the back of the sanctuary, a thoughtful expression on his face. He approached slowly, his hands tucked into his pockets. "That was beautiful, Mary," he said, his voice soft. "I don't think I've ever heard anything like it." I smiled, a little embarrassed. "I'm not even sure where it came from," I admitted. "It just felt like the right thing to play." He nodded, sitting down in the pew closest to me. "You've been through a lot these past few months," he said. "I've seen the changes in you, the way you've opened yourself up to others. It's inspiring." His words struck a chord in me, and I hesitated before speaking. "Do you think it's possible," I said slowly, "for life to be like a song? For every choice, every word, to leave a mark on something eternal?" The pastor tilted his head, considering my question. "I think our lives are stories," he said finally. "And like any story, they're made up of moments, some joyful, some painful, some that seem insignificant at the time, but turn out to matter more than we realize. Whether it's a song, a story, or a prayer, I believe it all weaves together into something greater than we can understand." I nodded, his words resonating with the lessons I'd been shown in that otherworldly place. "I think I've spent too much of my life focusing on the wrong things," I said. Perfection, control, my own fears and insecurities. I never realized how much those things were drowning out the music I was meant to create. The pastor smiled gently. "The fact that you see it now is what matters," he said. "It's never too late to change the melody." After he left, I stayed in the sanctuary a while longer, reflecting on his words. I thought about all the people whose lives had touched mine: Sarah, the choir, Matthew, even my father, and how each of them had shaped my song in ways I hadn't fully appreciated before. I realized that my journey wasn't just about repairing what was broken. It was about embracing the beauty that had always been there, even in the imperfections. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, I took out the notebook where I'd written my list months ago. The names and moments I recorded then felt distant now, like echoes of a person I no longer was. I turned to a blank page and began to write again, not a list of wrongs to right, but a new kind of list: moments of gratitude, acts of kindness, goals for the future. As I wrote, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet assurance that I was on the right path. The celestial music still lingered in the back of my mind, its echoes softer now, but no less powerful. It wasn't a burden or a weight anymore, it was a guide, a reminder of what I was working toward. My song wasn't finished, but I didn't want it to be. There was still so much to learn, so much to create, so much to give. When I finally put the pen down, I glanced at the clock and realized it was late. The house was quiet, the night outside still and calm. I stood by the window, looking out at the stars, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of contentment. I didn't know what the future held, but I wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, I would face it with open hands and an open heart, ready to keep writing my song, one note at a time.